Good afternoon. My name is Laurel Toyofuku, and it's my pleasure to welcome you back to Lincoln Center Activate for today's Thinking Inclusive Design session. To describe myself and my surroundings, I'm an Asian woman, have light-colored skin, shoulder-length brown hair, and am wearing a gray sweater. I'm sitting in front of a white wall and wooden bookcase. Before we get started, a few housekeeping items. Please note that your microphones will be muted, but feel free to ask us questions and engage with other participants using the chat feature. My colleagues John and Robert will be moderating and happy to help. Please use the Q&A feature to ask our panelists questions. This session is being live captioned and is available in English, French, Mandarin, and Spanish. The link to access these features is in the chat. If you are using a screen reader, you have the option of enabling or disabling screen reader alerts through the Zoom settings using the Accessibility tab. American Sign Language interpretation is also being provided by Stephanie and Nicole for today's session. And don't forget to join the Lincoln Center Activate Facebook group to connect with other participants and continue the conversation. Before we begin the session, a brief introduction of my colleague Laura Sloan, who will open the workshop. Laura is the Accessibility Manager at Lincoln Center. She oversees several accessibility programs, including Passport to the Arts, a free program designed for children, teens, and adults with disabilities and their families, and Lincoln Center Moments, a free performance-based program specially designed for individuals with dementia and their caregivers. Laura also works with the Access Ambassadors, a career readiness program that provides meaningful job skills development and exposure to careers in the arts for New York City high school students with disabilities. With that, it's my pleasure to hand it over to Laura.
Hi, everyone. I'm Laura Sloan. Thank you so much, Laurel, for that introduction. And we're so excited to have you here with us today. Thank you. I'll give a visual description of myself before introducing my co-host, Sina. I am a Middle Eastern woman with light olive skin tone. I have long dark hair. I am currently wearing a headset that has a mic attached to it. And I have on a black blazer, and under that I have a green and white striped shirt. I am in my tiny, tiny studio apartment in Manhattan, but behind me is a white wall with a framed world map picture. And you may see some plants in the corners as well. I am so excited to be with Sina here today on this panel. Sina Bahram runs Prime Access Consulting, an inclusive design firm that weaves together considerable passion and deep technical talent into solutions that facilitate access for the widest possible audience. Be it through low tech or high tech, PAC's goal is to elevate the practice of cultural heritage to welcome everyone. And I'm happy to welcome Sina to the panel. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. I'll do a brief visual description, I suppose. I am male, medium to light skin, also Middle Eastern. I have what I'll lovingly refer to as COVID hair. Haven't had access to the barber as much as we would all like, I suppose. I'm sitting in an office chair, and behind me, I'm unsure if it's in frame or not, there is a bookshelf to my right, your left, and a tile floor possibly visible in my office, and a couch in the background.
Wonderful. Thank you, Sina. We're going to welcome our first arts educator to the panel to join us, Olivia Jones from Arena Stage, and we'll welcome her on. I'll give a really brief introduction, and then she can jump in with talking about her project. Olivia Jones, Training Programs Manager at Arena Stage, has worked as an arts administrator, project manager, and teaching artist throughout the arts and cultural sector for the past 8 years. When partnering with organizations, she specializes in tailored project development, arts education, community engagement, and facilitation focused on decolonialization, accessibility, culturally responsive pedagogy, and more. And really quickly before Olivia starts, Sina, I forgot to ask you to jump in, and could you tell us just briefly about the structure of today's program and our goals with thinking inclusively?
Sure. We're really looking forward to engaging with 4 different projects and different, different approaches with respect to accessibility. These folks are all in different places in their journey in terms of accessibility and inclusive design. We'll talk a little bit about what that means. But I think it's important to understand that this is all coming from a place of wanting to make things better. It takes a lot of guts to be in front of everyone and present a project. And so, it's definitely something that we should consider through a lens of compassion and understand that there's always room for improvement. It's not really our goal to focus on what's happened before, but rather to point out opportunities where we can make things more inclusive, more accessible, more available to the widest possible audience moving forward. And hopefully this discussion and this interactive, iterative approach is helpful because it may spur some conversations amongst the chat or amongst all of the participants that are here today, which is amazing to see so many people here, and also to spur some action amongst all of you in terms of your projects that you'll engage in the future.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Sina. And I'd like to welcome Olivia. If you want to unmute yourself and show your face, thanks.
Hello, everyone. I am Olivia. Thank you so much, Laura, for the introduction. I'm going to briefly describe myself and my environment. I am a Black woman in her 20s. I have hair that starts off as braids and turns into waves that goes all the way down to my waist. I have a shirt on that is made of small squares full of chevron patterns of red, green, blue, and yellow. And I'm wearing red glasses and I have 2 piercings in my nose. My background is covered in sticky chart paper filled with ideas from the students that I work with as I am in my home office / classroom. So thank you for having me. That's who I am so far. And I'm here to talk about capturing emotional response. That's a lot of what our recent lessons and what our work has to do with at Arena Stage. And we have been creating inclusive design by sort of universal lesson planning. We sort of have a base outline that we can apply to many audiences, many age ranges, and that we're able to adjust to different learning styles, intellectual disabilities, anyone with a mental health condition. And recently we've been adjusting our lesson plans in response to trauma and stress related disorders, and a lot of them that have been brought on by the recent circumstances. Our target audience is anyone who's willing to participate. We'll typically group them by age. So we'll do projects with very young audiences all together. We'll do workshops with caregivers and their families all in one. We typically group elementary school students together, middle school together, high school and college age students together. So we segment them that way for us, and then we get to know each individual and adjust. Our goals are really to create art that leads to productive inquiry. So you want to talk about what someone might be experiencing and helping them relate that to their audience through art. To help folks understand what they're going through, understand their perspective, understand their needs and their hopes for tomorrow. That's a lot of what we use to capture emotional response. We want to make a connection between storytelling and movement for those who might not be writers or speakers. Incorporate visual art for those who like to express themselves this way. There's room for any type of expression, whether we are writing a play or creating a film. And that's a little bit about what we're doing. I have a small example from one of our Voices of Now ensembles, which is an Arena Stage program, and there's multiple ensembles that partner with DC schools. We also have a grief ensemble that partners with the Went Center, and a mentor ensemble that are folks who have previously engaged with the program, who are ready to support other folks who are creating. Each of those ensembles were creating individual pieces, and then we had quarantine hit. So they abandoned their original separate pieces, and instead they all came together to create one film. This is an example of how we created segments exploring their emotional response to recognizing that they had a last day that they didn't know was going to be their last day. In the film, you will see two students paired together side by side. One student is going to be in a darker room. They're wearing a dark t-shirt. They have long brown hair and pale skin, which is contrasted by the student in the next window who has a fuchsia pink room, who has long braids. She's a young Black woman. And our young Black woman will be performing movement, responding to the language that is being shared by our other participant. So Kevin, if you would like to share the link from last day, please.
I didn't know that on my last day, it was my last day. The last day to hold someone close, and the last day I walked with relaxed shoulders, and the last day I passed people on the sidewalk without a thought, and the last day learning, and the last day gathering, and the last day dancing through space like it's insignificant, and the last day breathing. And we don't even see these stock market moments of our lives bleeding out because it's all happening too fast and too suddenly and too soon. And we're just left wondering where the hell the world went 2 weeks ago and where it's gonna go.
Thank you for saying so. I see in the comments folks are responding to the piece, which is wonderful. So we have an example of that piece that was some of our older students. And we work with folks from all around the world. And the lesson plan that we are going to be focusing on and discussing today is for third, fourth, and fifth graders who we're currently working together. We're on lesson number 5. So although these are all written out, the lessons change in the moment based on response to their stress, on the different learning styles, the disabilities that we encounter in a classroom space, as well as just some of the stress and trauma of Zoom fatigue for so long for so many of our young people, where one day in a classroom is a lot for them to carry, and it is even more for them to carry in a distracting home environment where they're experiencing school and their siblings are and their parents are working from home. So it is a new environment to adapt to, and we really want to help them create meaningful art quickly, and where we find they respond really well to having a product. So we work one scene at a time and interacting with one another. And so there's a lot of different factors of these learners that help us to create narrative and movement and art all together. And I think for right now, if there's anything in particular that someone would like to expand on, I can. Otherwise, I can launch into what I've prepared. But I want to make sure that I'm addressing the folks who are in the room today, if that's okay, Laura.
Great. If anybody has any questions, please also feel free to put it in the Q&A. So we're monitoring the Q&A. And Sina, if you have any additions that you wanted to add.
Yeah, I think this was, by the way, thank you for doing the description beforehand for the video being blind. I really appreciated that. So thank you very much for doing so. a question for you on these videos. Are they all so two actually? Are they all in this format where it's the side by side and a portrayal with body mechanics in one and narration in the other, or do they take different formats as well?
They take a lot of different formats, depending on how the artist feels they can best share their work in perspective. And we also have folks that prefer to be behind the scenes. So we have, in the full length version of this film, we have folks who are animators, and so they prefer to bring someone else's words to life. We have folks who write different pieces. The poem was written by a different student than the performers in that space, but we often explore inquiry as an approach, as a pedagogy through language paired with movement, because we find that we're able to reach what their true response is by connecting those two together. And then we'll zoom back out from there and figure out what's the best way. Does this movement inspire a song? Or did this particular phrase inspire a poem or a dance, or even shadow puppetry? So we are up for any way any young person is willing to express themselves.
Gotcha. That's very helpful. Thank you. And with respect to like thinking of accessibility affordances, one of the things you were doing this live during right before the video was audio description. So I just wanted to ask if that's been looked at, or if you know, you have any thoughts on it. I know it can be a little challenging here with this kind of video because there's not only simultaneous scenes going on, but also there's pretty much a straight narration from beginning to end, which can sometimes be problematic or sometimes difficult to introduce audio description into after the fact.
Yes, so we are exploring a lot of the different mediums and how we can make our work more accessible. These pieces kind of had to be cranked out within 4 weeks, where typically we use a 9-month process. And so we didn't know if this was going to be the only time when it was May. We now know that we're going to be producing this type of film again. And we are finding that by adjusting the process of creation to include more sensory activities so that more folks can be deeply engaged, and figuring out how we can reach more folks with the content by captioning on each video. Next level, having audio description. So step by step, figuring out how we can incorporate those elements, and also how we can empower our young people to create that accessible design for their own work, which will be something that they carry and value with themselves, that they could take to other people. Or even in our lesson plans with our 3rd, 4th, and 5th graders, we'll ask them to describe what they saw another student do. So they might be practicing that skill. But in 3rd grade, they're not sure exactly what they're going to do with it. But we know that when we get closer to lesson 8 and 9, that we'll start discussing what that means for film and video, and how that fits into the industry and how it helps them reach more people. Where some of them are living in homes with folks who have different disabilities, and we want to make sure that they can also experience their work. So how can we reach not just wider audiences, but make sure that they can reach their own families? And that's something that's important to us, is now we know that this process is mainstay, and we'll also probably continue at least one virtual ensemble even post-pandemic, because we're able to reach so many people.
One interesting thing comes to mind is, gamifying it a little bit, pretending you're on the phone talking with a friend who's not there, but describing what's going on. So it sort of, reduces this this sort of burden sometimes people feel. I think it's a little bit less with kids, but with adults, one of the things that happens is, this fear element that goes, oh, I don't know what, I wouldn't know what to say, or I'm afraid I'm not going to describe it correctly, or I'm not going to use the right words, that kind of thing. But if you sort of relax the constraint and go, hey, just describe it to a friend of yours that's not able to join, give them a blow by blow. It sort of then alleviates that sort of gotcha in the brain, and then allows you to say, oh, okay, I'm just gonna let myself be okay and describe things. And that's just an activity that I think could be a lot of fun.
I think that's perfect. We've been doing tour guides with our third graders because we want them to practice describing their elementary school,
Yep.
where we've never been there because we're meeting virtually.
Yeah.
And so we have them sort of close their eyes and walk us through what happens as soon as you get out of the car, off of the bus.
Yes.
What do you see? Can you describe the smells, the sounds, all of those things? And so tour guides has really helped us. And our objective was to get a tour guide experience so we can make a map for a theme park, so that the objective to them is to make the map of the theme park.
Yeah.
But they are developing those skills. So I think gamifying is perfect, Sina, and finding other ways where I think the telephone version would really land with some of our older students who might not care as much about the theme park. So that's a really great idea, and I wrote it down and I'm going to steal it.
Please feel free. One last question for you. When you mentioned representation, I think a little bit earlier, and so I was struck. I really appreciated your description. A lot of times in more classical description, skin color is not mentioned, and this is really deeply problematic because it defaults white, which that's a whole other webinar. And so I'm interested in representational issues also. If some of your participants have different abilities, different body shapes, etc., and how that's come up, with this audience, with a younger audience, in terms of how they're choosing to portray that and what some of the issues are around there. Not only like from an accessibility and inclusion perspective, but also just from like a peer group and social perspective, if that makes sense.
Yes, that's perfect. A lot of our students respond to specific themes. So we usually have a title for the piece before we create it. And so it might be something zoomed out as long division.
Okay.
And we'll explore all of the words associated with long, all the words associated with division, all the things associated with long division, and we'll go through that entire list until we start to remove ourselves probably from arithmetic and schooling and math, and we might get to something like long division deployment, long division, other sorts of division between neighbors, especially in this moment.
Yeah.
And so we find that identity comes up so often, and we often try to incorporate exercises that have folks relate to their identities in a positive way, and then also reflect their identities to someone else, which is really important no matter what their identity is. Many of the pieces talk about that and relate to that, where the piece that we created happened, was completed just a week before the second boom of the Black Lives Matter movement. And so although we had some of those themes, because when you're Black, your lives matter all of the time, it wasn't as heavy as we've seen it used recently.
Yeah.
And we make sure that folks connect all the different elements of their identity to what they're doing, bring it forward to the piece, and bring it forward to the ensemble elements. Okay. Especially in DC, we're the chocolate city. So many of our participants are people of color. And then you add so many other types of identities, whether it is depression or anxiety, or whether they have a challenge and they've decided to reveal that they're dyslexic, which they might not have done that in another space, or where they talk about that either they themselves or that their siblings or family members might have intellectual disabilities or physical disabilities. And those all slowly reveal themselves when you have different topics that all come from one word. And you like, oh, do you have anything that connects to it? And so that's how we reveal their identities and reflect them back out. So it's not like, hey, what's your most vulnerable thing about yourself and your family? But they feel that it's relating to a greater purpose and reflection. So I think that's a really important way to view intersectionality for each individual artist, and there's a lot of it.
That's awesome. I'm noting time, so I'll stop asking questions.
Hi, everyone. It's Laura. I'm going to jump in. Sina and Olivia, this is an amazing conversation. I just wanted to echo what we're seeing in the comments and in the chat and the Q&A about the having these students really deeply involved from the creation through the performance and from the ground up. There was a question about, have you considered having the dancers create the script for the audio description? And another one about, did the students choose the music?
Yes, so we have not thought about having dancers do the description, and I think that's a really wonderful idea, and I'm going to write it down before I forget, because if I don't write things down, I will forget them. The second portion of the question, Lori, will you mind repeating it for me?
Yes, did the students choose the music?
They do sometimes. So we work with a sound designer, Rock Lee, who's been producing sound for Voices of Now, where whether we take some of their words or some of the description, and if we create pieces behind closed door, extend the script, we always bring it back for their approval, so they know that that's a part of the process. We accept whatever they offer and synthesize it. And bring it back. The same thing happens with sound design, where they can share maybe it's something they want to hear, maybe they describe it emotionally, and that we can supply that with them. So it's a combination of them. I really want this song to be in here, along with I wrote a song that I would like to be in here, or a musical piece, and we think this emotionally fits your work. How do you feel about it? Should we change it? So really keeping them involved in anything that we kind of superimpose on top of their work, so that they can veto it at any time, because it's not ours. Which
I'm
is
reminded of
exciting.
something. Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you were. I was on a delay. I apologize. Please go ahead.
No, that's perfect. That's exciting was the end of my phrase.
Oh, okay. I'm reminded of there are these YouTube videos, and I forget the hashtag they're all organized under, but I'll find it during this webinar and post the link in the chat, where folks have taken music videos and replaced the lyrics of the music video with what is going on in the music video. Now, they didn't do this for accessibility reasons. They just did it because they thought it would be kind of funny and just something to do on YouTube. However, a bunch of my blind friends were like, "Oh wow, I finally know what's going on in all of these classic music videos from the 80s and 90s and 2000s." And so just another idea to toss out, that if you have the opportunity for, like you mentioned, certain folks are writing the music maybe, or writing the lyrics, etc. It could be a creative thing to do, where you might even have a song that you're really passionate about, but maybe not the lyrical portion, maybe only the musical portion, but you could use the lyrics as an opportunity for also enhancing the inclusivity of the offering, or by also, slipping in your message in there as well.
I love that, and I wrote it down word for word. Sina, come work on our different time capsules in our Voices of Now program with us.
We should totally talk.
Yes.
You're doing amazing work.
Thank you. Is there anything else that friends are asking Laura? Or
Wonderful.
time. I'm also terrible at time.
In the last minute, maybe this is something you can add to your list, as well as if you wanted, after we move on to the next panelist, you can address any of the Q&As directly too. But I just wanted to point out that somebody mentioned having the idea of students being tour guides, which we love, mentioning do you get out of the car or off the bus, asking students who might walk, skateboard, or bike to school, because really involving the students' identities in that too.
Ooh, thank you.
Thank you to Carrie for that too. And thank you so much, Olivia and Sina. This has been a wonderful development and conversation.
Thank you.
Thanks. We're going to move on to our next panelist. Fred Moreau is a director, teacher, and teaching artist who works a lot with teenagers, especially with newcomers. He thinks of the theater as a communion and a political way of expression. So I'd like to welcome Fred. Thank you so much. If you want to continue that introduction and then tell us a little bit about what you're working on.
Yes, of course. Thanks, Laura, and thanks everyone from the Lincoln Center Activate. As you can see, I'm a newcomer in English, so I'm basically a francophone, of course, but I'm speaking English. So I'm a white blonde man, which is in Montreal, in Canada. So I'm speaking French basically, but for now I'm practicing English. I have a Kate Haring shirt. I am in my living room kitchen, and there's a pumpkin just behind me, and it's really the time that Halloween should be there. So as I said, English is not my first language. As my newcomers, in fact, in Canada, I'm working a lot with newcomers. This year it will be 400 students that I'm working with. I'm working with Rencontre Théâtre Ado, which is a festival who reach 25,000 teenagers in Laval, in Montreal, but also in Canada, in Quebec. And the project that I made and that I will make with you is really try out, because we made one project just after the lockdown in March or in April, and this activity will be the following of this project. So basically, the first project was trip around something. So it was really interesting that you spoke with Olivia about environment and around something, because that was the goal of this. So basically, it was the goal to do a film by themselves. So it was all high school teenagers, and they have to do one film with the team, trip around something. So ... So it could be like a trip around their refrigerator. It could be trip around their rooms. It could be trip around their neighborhood. And we had so fantastic things. And we made a film, 1 hour film with that. So it was really a story that you could follow, of course. And basically, we had this goal that it was really difficult for the students, especially for the teenagers, because they didn't have a voice in the lockdown. So I really want to give them a voice, and especially the spirit of the community, to work with each other and to make an entire screenplay of that. They could do a visual thing, so they could really basically have their they could take photography of their environment, or the character they want. So one character was an apple, which was under the bed. So it was really amazing, this video. And they could do recording. They could, so it really can take every form they want. It was really to let them really imaginate what they want. And the following project, that we will try, we'll do a little try. I'm really anxious about it, but I'm sure it will be cool. This project, so that we want to do, is another project of film. So and the goal is to have fun, and especially to discover their neighborhood, because the neighborhood where I work is really a poor neighborhood. It's in Laval, so it's really near Montreal, but it's really a poor neighborhood. Actually, there's a lot of newcomers there, and they are not proud of where they live. So environment is really important for them, and it's really important for me to make them really proud of that. And we want to help them to reading and writing something. So basically, 75% in this area are learning French. So it was really important for us to help them continuing this learning after school. So it will be an after school project. And we chose another story, which is based on Life and Opinions of Tristram Shandy, Gentleman, which is 600 pages, but it's not it's not 600 pages for the students. It's the story basically of someone that we didn't know. In the 600 pages, we never know who he is. So it's just anecdotes and perceptions and life and opinions. So I'm observing this novel, and we will work with that. If you want to work, all the participants, we will do a little tryout because I found it was really interesting. As I said, we will work with environment and we will create a new film with that, which will be called not Trip Around Something, but the life and opinions of ... So it could be basically everything. And we will do a little tryout. If you want to do it with me, it will be really cool. And I'm really looking forward to the result. And it's based on one tiny paragraph on life and opinions of ... now. So individually, just I want to ask you, just close your eyes and think of one place that is really touches you. So that one place that moves you, one place which is really important for you. Okay, I will give you like 10 seconds to think about it. Think about it's really the continuing of Olivia. Think about the smell. Think about the walls. Think about of what you think about this. And you choose one specific object that you have near you. So you just chose one specific object that you have near you. And you can write the objects in the chat, actually. And we will try something. So you can write the object in the chat. And I will, oh, that's really cool. Okay, that's perfect. Oh, it goes fast. Okay. In Meredith, there is Jade Plan. In Lynn, there is Compass. In Alexandra, there is Blue Notebook. In Jennifer's Carol environment, there is some window. In Victoria Donnelly's environment, there is a box of matches. In Erin, there's a bagel. In Maria, there is a seashell. In Karina's Rubaja's environment, there's a swing. That's really cool. In Beth Selding environments, there's a piano. In Matthew Capizzuto environment, there's a pencil sharpener. In Jean E. Taylor environment, there's a marionette. And we will do the end with that. And in that of all our community, there is 55 streets into any of which you may walk. In that when you have seen them with all that belongs to them fairly by daylight, their gates, their bridges, their square, their statues, and have crusaded, then you will have seen Hearth. Cool. So basically, it really works. Basically, we will do this activity. Of course, this will be the first activity of the creation of the film, and it's really makes the teenagers engage themselves to know their environment, to love their environment, their neighborhood, and we will work on the Tristram Shandy novel, and we will do some reproaching between the life of each other and the novel, and it will be the beginning of the film, and we will work again with that. So this is the project. That's really cool.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Fred. That was really nice. Sina, do you have any first thoughts about that?
So, and you can hear me, yes?
Yes.
Okay, great. No, that was really wonderful. I was enjoying reading the comments streaming in as everyone was commenting. I'm interested. So this is one video at the end. Is that correct?
Yes, exactly. Yes.
Okay. And then what's been some of the discussions, just thinking back to the previous discussion around accessibility and inclusive design, what have been some of the discussions there around not only accessibility from the perspective of for example, audio description for someone who's blind or has low or no vision, or sign language or captions, but also language-based accessibility, for example, not only sign language, but also subtitles for different languages. And also different forms of, there's LSQ in Quebec, for example, instead of ASL for American Sign Language. So there's all of these different ways that newcomers may have to communicate based on having different abilities. What's been some of the discussion and topics that have come up around all of that?
We had some discussion about it because basically it's really interesting because LSQ, which is basically the ASL, is really helpful with newcomers because it comes really it comes another language for them to help them learn French. Basically, we are always in with a lot of factors in this project because we are working with people who are not always speaking in French. In fact, they are never speaking in French. So it's really important for us to help them learn French and practice them French.
Yes.
But I think it would be really interesting to make this accessible to everyone, but with a lot of other ways, actually. I think audio description and the subtitles are really helpful, not just for blind people, for people who don't heard, but it's really helpful for newcomers to learn French because you can read the subtitle in spite of just hear it, so it's really helpful for them. And it's really helpful to have an audio description because they are not always understanding what it's about. So it will.
That's perfect. I wanted to take one opportunity. I know we're tossing around a couple of terms. I just wanted to define it for some of the audience members. So one quick second while I do that. So when we talk about audio description, that's a secondary audio track that usually involves some description of what is going on, and we can show an example of that in a moment. When we talk about subtitles, we're talking about the text that appears on the screen, but in a different language. This is important, in a different language than the language being spoken. Captions, on the other hand, are the text that appears on the screen, but in the same language that is being spoken, because it's an equivalency for someone who may not be able to or prefer to hear the contents of the video. And it's important to note that captions also involve non-speech based audio, like background noises, music, etc. So please go on. I just wanted to define those terms for the audience so everybody knew what we were talking about.
No problem. That's perfect. But that would be a great way, as I'm speaking, that we as the parents of our teenagers don't speak French, of course, they will not understand the film. So as I'm speaking to you, maybe the subtitle will be so helpful for them to learn what their high school teenagers will do. So I think it would be really a good way to learn it. Yeah, and to learn French. Why not?
What are some of the other issues that have come up while you've been creating this and co-creating this piece in terms of just challenges with respect to thinking about different audiences? You have people who are not fluent in French yet, and so they need to communicate with one another just during the creation of this piece. What have been some of the solutions you've come up with to facilitate that level of communication amongst people?
In fact, image and description of image is really powerful. Video, photo is really one thing, and really the power of explanation and just take the time to do it. So maybe repetition was really important to create the video. Actually, the narrator of the video is a newcomer, and she is just in Quebec for 2 years, and she's speaking French like nobody. It's really amazing. And we really discovered that I think the most difficult thing was to make I'm always saying that I don't want a pizza. I want something which is really a film, really continuing, and it's really hard to enter in all the environments, and those environments would be really one thing. So and that will be the goal of the next project, really, like to do one thing together, really. It's basically a story that you can follow. For me, it's really important, because for people who are listening, it's really easier if it's a story from my point of view, of course, for this project specifically. But as we are working a lot with newcomers, in fact, we discovered that one of the big issues was one of the quality is that it's really hard for them to speak in French, but it's just this language that they have in common. Even English is not in common for all of them. In fact, 50% of them are speaking English, just 50. So if you want to speak with everybody, you have to speak French. So it's really cool. It's an issue because it's really pretty hard, and you have really often to help them learn by objects, by descriptions, but it's really a quality because they have to speak French. So it's really a challenge.
Gotcha.
Fred,
go ahead.
Sorry,
Go.
really quickly, it's Laura, just to jump in really quick, because building off of that, we've had a few questions asking about where they're coming from. So what languages are they mostly speaking? Where are the majority of them coming from?
Majority, they are coming. The majority is coming from Syria. We have a lot of Maghreb students, so Algeria. We have more and more students who are coming from Mexico and Central America, and basically those two communities are 70% of our newcomers, and they are coming since they could come since like 1 year, 3 months, or 3 years. So it's really different, the language. Yes.
Thank you. And Sina, I cut you off there. Sina, so go ahead.
No worries. I was wondering if we had a minute. This might be a nice time to show that video that I sent over before, because it demonstrates participatory audio description. So just to set the stage for this, there's a video that a friend of mine, his two children, his name's JJ, his two children put together during the pandemic. They're wanting to make a comedic sort of their own TV station during quarantine. But their dad, my buddy JJ, he's an audio description. So when Corey Timpson and myself, when we're working with all these clients on inclusive design projects, audio description is one of the things that comes up. And JJ is an audio describer we work with a lot. So when his kids went to go make a YouTube video, of course, there was some influence that they should audio describe their content. And I thought it might be an interesting way of just showing sort of a really, it doesn't need to be fully professional or anything. It's just the kids doing their own audio description as they're producing the content. And it's related both to this project, but also to the previous project we talked about.
Mm-hmm.
Dripping black letters appear on a red background.
Hello, this is me, Count Floyd, here with Monster Chiller Oral Theater. We have a scary one for you this week. It's called Dr. Tong's Condo of Hoarded Toilet Paper.
How's your supply of toilet paper?
A teenager in a false mustache and a stuffed suit repeatedly offers you a roll of toilet paper.
Don't forget to send in for your 3D glasses. Ooh!
Now, silliness and different ratios of adorability aside, what's interesting, to me there is that it just seems pretty effortless. It's not a professionally audio described sort of thing, but it's something that just lets more people have access to that video. And also the kids really enjoyed doing that and thinking through, like, what are the parts we can describe, what are some parts that we can not describe because of a time constraint. So it sort of spurred some conversations as well, and it just just an example of, weaving the audio description into the content itself.
Yeah, that could be really a great idea, like to work with this kind of audio description, and it's a way to describe the environment, So it's really a good way to work with that, and it's really a good idea. Yes, really, really cool. And as I saw, toilet paper was really, really popular because I had a video of toilet paper too in the final video of the first project. So
Awesome.
it was the pandemic.
Topic of mind these days.
Yes. Thank you.
Yeah.
Wonderful. It's Laura. I'm just going to jump in really quick and highlight something somebody wrote in the comments that's a wonderful addition to this is inviting the students and families to contribute by, if the film is available for these families to view outside of the venue, it would be an opportunity and exercise for the students to provide the subtitles as they watch with their families or to narrate in their language of origin.
Yes, that's really actually a very, very great idea, and I'm writing it down right there because and we observed that the parents of newcomers, of newcomers, don't have so much links of their child because they are so occupied. So basically, we invite them in theater, we invite them in the projection films, we invite them to a festival, and they could not be there because they are always working, and it's perfectly understandable, of course. So it's really, really, really important that they have that they have a part of what their students are doing. And of course, it's really a very, very great idea. Maybe traduce the video in each language. That would be a great work, but that would be a very, very good idea. Yeah.
Right. Highlighting also, people have been loving the idea of the audio description in the chat, and making it as simple as like an 8-year-old can do it on YouTube, to, as somebody mentioned, Kinetic Light has provided 3 different types of audio descriptions for depending on the level of audio description for a single performance. So a technical question about audio description, Sina, maybe you can address this. What is best to have the description before or after the actions and language?
There is an entire nuanced school of thought there, right? So first of all, we should talk about the fact that there are 2 forms of audio description, one that is predominantly used. So for example, if anybody wants to check this out, if you use Netflix, for example, you can go to Netflix, you go to the language settings, and you can select, let's say you are an English speaker, so you would say English with audio description. It's one of the options. Or if you're a Francophone, French with audio description, if that's available. That's the form of audio description you will hear there is professionally produced, and oftentimes is going to be a voice that's going to describe what's going on, trying not to speak over dialogue. And if they have to make the choice, they will choose generally I should say a super majority of the time, 90% of the time, to make the description, to say the description before something happens. So occasionally I will hear about something and it's very clear, even from the audio of the media, that something hasn't happened yet, right? But it's better to have that, the thinking is, than to have the description after the fact, because then you're left wondering what's going on, right? So you can't always get it perfect. But here's where I think Netflix has done a pretty spectacular job. Now, I don't know how intentional this is on their part, but I do know that they're starting to really weave inclusion into their whole pipeline. And that means, for example, in the writer's room. So I was struck by I don't remember what series I was watching the other day, but 2 characters were texting one another. And they were texting one another. You could hear the iPhone sounds, the iMessages and the bubbles on screen, etc. But here's what was interesting about it. The audio describer had nothing to do, because the characters themselves, in their own voices, which you have now learned throughout the series to associate with them, were reading their audio, their text messages as they were texting one another. Now, this was thematically, it completely fit, like it was intentional. But if you think about it, oftentimes media has these scenes where two characters might be texting or the camera will linger on some text and there is no audio component. So there's not only an opportunity for professionally done audio description and that track, that additional track of audio that allows you to understand what's going on by explanation, but also to make sure that within the content itself, you can oftentimes slip in just a few extra words. For example, imagine being a museum a docent, and instead of saying, as we can see here, you say something like, as we can see to our left, the brown chair is the feature of our next story, right? Something like this. You weave that language into your own already planned out script. And this way you're able to really minimize actually the necessity for audio description to those points where it's like a pure action sequence or something along those lines. I hope that helps a little bit.
Thank you. Yes, that's a brilliant example too of thinking inclusively as you're building your videos or building your programs. Thank you so much.
For example, I'll add one thing to that. Imagine doing a pan, for example, in a documentary or nature film or something along these lines. A lot of times when we're working on projects like that and helping make them more inclusive, we're able to work with folks at the storyboarding phase to say, if you give us 750 milliseconds more, just 3/4 of a second more, that's a couple of extra words you just allowed the audio describer. And it looks intentional, but you just made that space in the film. Again, not trying to get away from artistic intent, not trying to take away from the cadence or anything along these lines, but oftentimes it's 6 1/2. Like, it doesn't matter if that pan is just a few, like even a second longer, but does it make a difference for the audio description? And then what we found in those situations, for example, this came up a lot during the work on Canadian Museum for Human Rights. The movies had to be in French and in English. Well, French takes up more space. And so because we had that extra little piece, not only did it help the audio description, it also helped the dubbing track when it was translated into French from English.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. So Fred, we're going to move on to our next panelist, but I want to thank you so much for contributing. And if people have any more questions for Fred or Sina in this moment, please feel free to enter them into the Q&A. And Fred can also help answer those directly too.
Thank you.
Thank you. Wonderful. We're going to welcome two more panelists to our stage from Inclusive Arts Vermont. Heidi Suevens is the Director of Community Partnerships for Inclusive Arts Vermont. She is an artist with a disability with over 10 years of arts administration and community organizing experience. Alexandra Turner is a teaching artist and Director of School and Community Programs with Inclusive Arts Vermont. She is primarily a visual artist and dancer and uses multiple modalities to meet the needs of the variety of learners throughout the lifespan that she engages with. I'd like to welcome you both.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'll begin. I'm Heidi Suevens, as you said. I am a white female with short brown hair. Today I'm wearing an olive turtleneck sweater, which means the season is here. Behind me is my apartment. There's some lights and shadows and rectangular openings of a doorway, and I use she, her pronouns. It's a pleasure to be here learning with you and with my colleague Alexandra, so thanks for that opportunity. We want to begin with a bit of a pause. And first we want to say as an access statement that we trust you to take care of yourself. Whatever you need to do to turn off the screen, turn on the screen, to take a walk, to stretch, that we just respect that that's part of what people need, and we honor that. So we want to invite you to do that. What we're going to be sharing is invitation only. And before we go any further, we just want to take a mindful moment from the busyness, from all of the wonderful energy and information from the previous sessions, and just take a pause, maybe about 30 seconds. Invite you to close your eyes if you'd like. You can take a few breaths, but we're just going to have some silence to bring us more fully into this space together. Thank you. Alexandra?
So my name is Alexandra Turner. I am a white woman with blue eyes, dark, long brown hair, freckles. I'm wearing sort of sparkly earrings and a blue scarf and a blue sweater over a blue dress. And I'm standing by an angled white wall with a wood wall behind me, a plant, and some other accoutrements of an art studio. I want to start with just a quick introduction to Inclusive Arts Vermont. We're a statewide organization. We work with people throughout the lifespan in early childhood settings, in elementary and middle and high schools, and then also in our adult arts. And we also produce exhibitions of work for artists with disabilities. The work that we're going to share with you today is a little snippet of a workshop that Heidi and I developed this summer in response to the fact that arts organizations in Vermont, some of them were planning to open for summer camps. And we were looking at that saying, wow, teaching artists are going to now be on the front line. They're going to be the first adults that students are going to see after they suddenly had to leave their schools and go through this sort of lockdown pandemic situation. So recognizing that, you know, in some places teaching artists are still only teaching on Zoom. In some places they're back in person. Here in Vermont, our schools are primarily open for in-person or remote or hybrid learning. So kind of just, we prepared this workshop for teaching artists and teachers who are going to be coming back to in-person learning and wanting to sort of address the different ways of communication and the self-care and other things that we were expecting adults might need to navigate this new being together but staying 6 feet apart and covering our faces and all the things that teaching artists will be facing. So this was a 1.5 hour workshop, and I say was, it is a 1.5 hour workshop. And we sent all of the sort of information that we really wanted people to get ahead of time in an email that had handouts, that had our slides. And then we really wanted to focus on the experience of being together on Zoom. So today I know that all of you have your cameras off and you can just see sort of 4 of us or 5 of us, depending on who's on. But we invited everyone to be on camera and be sort of live with us and experiencing these things together. So we really wanted to focus on kind of that time together. We started by building rapport and building safety, and then we sort of dove into the following. So I'm going to share my screen and share our slides with you, and invite you to sort of play along with us as teaching artists and educators. So we would have had our sort of welcome and connection, communication for connection. And then again, we would have gone through some other activities. So just, you're all there. You're already, you feel safe. You feel like you trust us. Here we go. And Heidi. And we did our pause. We actually did that with you all. On this slide, we have a giant black pause symbol, like what you would push on a remote control. And it says pause. A pause gives us a chance to notice what is happening, to put space between a stimulus and a reaction so that we can make a choice. A mindful breath, noticing what's happening, focusing on sensory information, and then choose a response. And then we have a slide that's a big sort of purple oval. It says nonverbal communication, body language, facial expressions, and gestures. And I'm going to turn it over to Heidi.
Great. And sorry.
And
I see the slides going.
Sorry, guys.
One of the things that we're really open to and interested in is this collaboration. Part of Alexandra and I's co-presenting is about different styles. And I'm an audio description user, so I really like words and I like that narration. And other people have different styles. So the 5 to 7 minutes that we have, there'll be some time with words and sometimes without words. So if you're a words person and we're silent, hold on. And if you're somebody who likes the silence and there's some talking, hold on. So we'll have a little bit of a balance. Right now,
I want to invite you, if you can turn on your screen, to turn that on and play with us. But if not, if that doesn't work out technologically, let's just use our imaginations, because part of what we want to do is get off the screen a little bit and into our bodies. So with the gestures, with body movements, there's lots of ways to communicate that don't include words. And even though we're using a lot of screens these days, what we want to do is to invite people to think beyond the screen and involve lots of other ways of communicating. And bodies are art. Our bodies are expressions. And the only other thing I'll say about communication is that even though we might use the same word or the same gesture, every time there's an opportunity for communication, there's an opportunity for miscommunication, especially when there's emotions. So we're just aware of that, and we want to experiment and play a little bit.
So the next slide says body language, and it has 3 figures across the top that are sort of icon figures. The first one is a black figure standing on 2 straight legs with 2 arms out to each side, bent at the elbows. And I invite you, if you are comfortable to do so, to stand at your desk or to sit where you're sitting and sort of try out this position with your body, bending at the elbows, arms out. Again, taking care of your own body, doing this if it feels right for you, and sort of just feel like, what does this, when you're standing in this position or you're sitting in this position or you're looking at this icon, what does that mean to you? What does that convey to you? And maybe you all can write it in the chat box. When we do it live, we just have people like share, but yeah, share in the chat box. How does this feel?
I want to say, I don't know, like I'm shrugging my shoulders.
I don't know. Yeah, right. And then we can play with like, what happens if you change it slightly? If you raise your shoulders, if you lower your shoulders? What happens if you put one arm down to your side, but leave the other up? And you all can't. Right. All right. So then you can just kind of like relax, shake out your body, try out this, the middle one. The one in the middle is like an icon of like a drawing or an art maquette figure with 2 hands on the hips and sort of feet spread apart and looking straight forward. So you can kind of play around with that or your version of that. And then how does that one feel?
Alexandra and Heidi, it's Laura. I can read out some of the responses we've been getting in the chat. Yeah, so some people say grounded, stand your ground, strong, power pose, don't mess with me, exclamation point, confident, mad, prominent, strong, earthy, rigid.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah. When we did a series of these workshops in the summer, and one of the teaching artists said, wow, I often stand like this when I'm with my students because I have like, I think she said I have shoulder pain, and it putting my hands on my hips like that relieves my shoulder pain. But when I see myself doing it, I really look like an authority figure, and that's not what I wanted to portray to my students, right? So it's like interesting thinking all those different range of responses of how this can look, and then playing around with it and like, what happens if you just tilt your head to the side? Does it still feel like an authority figure, or is it more like of an inquisitive, I'm here, I'm listening, I'm grounded? So how does that change things? So for the sake of time, I'm going to move on to gestures, and now we have a slide that has a purple shape at the top that says gestures in white, and it has a line drawing of a hand doing 2 fingers up and 1 finger across, which in the United States we often think of as a peace sign. So I'm gonna, Heidi, turn it over to you to talk about gestures a little bit.
Yeah, so in some of the movement groups or the theater improv groups, we often do an introductory greeting hello with a gesture, and then somebody will start that and the group will echo and mirror it. For this particular class, we invited that, but we also wanted to introduce the idea that sometimes when people are experiencing stress, for all sorts of reasons, words don't come quickly. And so there could be ways to have gestures of communication, like a pause or a stop or a way to have a language, if you will, that is unique to a culture that's expressive, that's both playful and fun and functional for whatever that is in the room. We were thinking over the summer about, whether somebody comes within the 6 feet of space, which we playfully talked about as 6 feet of love as a way to kind of frame it that might be supportive and encouraging rather than that sort of rigid that somebody talked about with the body posture. But really the gestures are playful and fun in a way of communicating when words may not be the first thing or the only thing, just to invite that as a culture and a creative expression.
So now we have another activity. I moved to a slide that says gestures of greeting, and it has like a hand with motion symbol around it, like a wave. So at this point, I am going to stop my screen share, and then you'll see me and Heidi and the interpreter and Laura again. I'm going to invite you to invent a new gesture that no one's ever seen before. And you get to do it in the privacy of having your camera off. Heidi and I are going to do it, and Laura are going to do it live. Okay. Invent a new gesture that means hello or a greeting. A new gesture of greeting. And I see Heidi has one hand on top of her head with her elbow sticking out to the side and 5 fingers opened up wide over top of her head. I love it.
I just want to say you're rocking the live audio description, so thank you for that.
Oh, thanks. All right, Laura's doing 2 hands by her side. Oh, good, John's joining us too. 2 hands beside her face, waving her fingers, wiggling her fingers and smiling. I see John is has his one hand facing him and is sort of waving and wagging his hand and sort of nodding his head side to side. Yeah, thanks everybody.
What's yours, Alexandra?
Oh geez, I'm gonna go with jazz hands bursting in front of my face. 2 hands bursting and open in front of my face and sort of making a half arc from into out. So, and again, with the live group, we do it together. We repeat each other's motions. If we've got time, time is like an accordion. So if we've used our time right and we have plenty of time here, then we turn it into a little dance. We're kind of like getting, activating people's artistry to think about how they as educators can use their artistic sensibilities to make this whole situation of coming together or teaching on Zoom, dealing with all these new regulations, doing all of that, but in kind of a more fun, joyful way, while also meeting the needs of lots of kinds of communicators. So that's the sort of end of our formal program for you all today, in air quotes. We also, just to note that we did a whole segment on communication with just our eyes because we're wearing masks, and also tone of voice and language choice. So we played around. We actually had people put on their masks in their own homes and play around with how do you, how does it look when you're feeling excited, happy, joyful, scared, all of those things.
Thank you both so much. That was really fun. And there's John with his mask on. This was a nice also way to stretch and breathe mid-program. So I want to hand it over to Sina if he has any, we're running a little short with about 7 minutes or so to discuss. So I want to pass it off to Sina.
Okay, I love that expression, by the way. The time is an accordion. Totally got to use that. That's beautiful, and very accurate. I'm curious. I'm struck by the differences of ability that people have with respect to moving their bodies, and whether it's comfort level or just ability in general. How has that come up in your workshops, if it has come up? And maybe a somewhat related question is, what about the intersection of that and folks who may be nonverbal for a variety of different reasons?
I'll start with that response and then invite Alexandra to add on. Generally speaking, we scaffold some of the entry points. So we did the gestures there. We can say you can move a finger, you can move a thought, so there's multiple options. And part of what we hope to do, and we do this with varying degrees of humanity, but we try to create a safe place, especially through the arts, that there's there's courage in taking a risk. There's not a wrong way to do it.
Yes.
And that's part of when we say, like, if we try to communicate, there's also the opportunity to miscommunicate. And I often talk about that as a dance. You know, if I stepped on your foot, I didn't mean to. Let me back up and try again. So there's that scaffolding. We also, and the nonverbal it helps, the verbal description helps with that, narrating and checking in with somebody that, like, it might be Sina, did I get that right? Or I'm seeing Sina doing this. So it's that balance of words and no words. We also put out a request for accommodations, a question mark. So if anybody has accommodation requests or specifics, in addition to what we're already offering, that we can have that invitation ahead of time, so that we are just more clear and somebody has a chance to identify what might be helpful for their success, if you will, and I put success in air quotes, in an individualized way that isn't on the Zoom screen in front of everybody else, making it kind of public.
I love that. And also, like, to ask about, it sounds like you're asking about ability, and you're excuse me, instead of asking about ability, you're asking about an affordance. Like, would you prefer audio description, or would captions help you, as opposed to, sometimes, even though it's been well-meaning, I've gotten questions like, well, exactly how blind are you? That sort of thing. So it's nice to see that you're concentrating on those affordances.
Yeah, thanks. What else did I miss, Alexandra? And I'm aware of time at the accordion, but I just want to make sure to include your perspective.
Yeah, I think you got it. Like, what we do is always offer an invitation and make it explicit that it's an invitation, and that I think Heidi said it. There's if you just want to, not just can, but do you just want to do this with one finger? Do you want to just do this with your eyes?
Right.
Do you want to do it with your camera off? It's always an option. It's always an invitation.
I'm wondering, have you had anyone who's chosen to use a surrogate object, or, for example, like a personal object that's very meaningful to them, or that they may use in the form of communication? Especially kids who are nonverbal sometimes have an auxiliary object that they would use for these purposes. Has that come up, and has that spurred conversations with others as a result of it coming up?
In our high school program over the summer, we went from in person to remote, and there was a participant there, and this is not for professional development, but just a side note, that person had, I believe it was a teddy bear or some sort of stuffed animal that became their friend and communicator, and it was welcomed and celebrated. And again, it was just another way to be creative and have that expression.
Awesome.
I feel like we're really privileged that our entry point is arts and inclusion. So we can see, and this is maybe a way of looking at things, but we see the opportunities and the learning that's happening, that's being presented. And it's kind of that back and forth.
That's awesome.
Tag teaming off of, you're talking about privilege and high level of affordances. I've been wondering for your programming, or any of our arts educators who've been on the panel, about the technology and the availability of technology that students may or may not have, especially ones that we're asking if they record anything at home, or if they their access to a computer or phone at home.
Yeah, this is a kind of a big topic, especially here in Vermont, where broadband internet access is still not a given. So we've dealt with that in various ways. So for instance, in our adult arts program, we have a cache of digital cameras, and we made those available to people to use, and offered them and their staff and their families, whoever's there helping them, the sort of tech support needed to be able to get pictures from a camera or a phone to us to participate in our online digital classes. And I'm also working on starting a residency that will use minimal technology and will be done through the mail. So working with high school students, and it's actually going to be like I mail them invitations and art, and they mail each other art. So it's going to be kind of much more analog.
If you do, I know we're tight on time, but if you do have Braille materials or tactile materials that you're sending as part of that, if it helps with postage, one of the services available in the United States is Free Matter for the Blind, and so you can stamp the envelope or package with that, and there's help for not having to pay postage, because they realize that Braille is more heavy and therefore can cost more. So that's been around for many decades now.
Thank you so much for that. I did not know that. That's great.
If you just Google like Free Matter for the Blind, it'll come right up. There's a stamp and everything.
Awesome.
Wonderful. I would love to continue this conversation, but I'm so sorry the accordion has played, so we we have to move on. But I want to thank you both so much, especially for the wonderful activities, and thank you, Sina. If anybody has questions, please feel free to put them in the Q&A. Alexandra and Heidi can both check that and respond directly. And thank you for all of the comments and the lovely conversations in the chat.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Okay, so we're going to move on to our final panelist, Leslie Macedo. Leslie Macedo is the program director at Musicopia, is a seasoned arts administrator with more than 20 years focused on traditional and classical music and dance from around the world. Throughout her career, Leslie has worked with internationally acclaimed artists, arranging performances and educational programs at major performing arts centers and educational institutions throughout the United States and Canada. Thank you so much, Leslie, for being with us. Oh, and you're mute, sorry.
It took me a moment to get everything up and running. I was clicking, it wasn't happening. So hello everyone, my name is Leslie Macedo, and a little bit of descriptive language. I am sitting I'm a white woman with long brown hair that's slowly graying, and I am wearing a gray sweater, and I'm sitting in front of a blue wall and a window with a chevron design curtain. So as Laura so graciously described, I am the program director at Musicopia. We're an arts organization based in Philadelphia, and we have many different aspects of our programming. We do between 3,000 to 4,000 programs a year. I manage most of the school-based programs, but we also have an orchestra, and I think it's 8 drum lines. Through the course of the spring, as obviously everyone was sort of merging to doing online programming, I had to reassess all of our programs. And one thing that became very clear to me through that process, because a lot of the students that we work with are visually impaired, I think actually for the most of the programs, it was visually impaired. We realized that we had to sort of, use the word, I can't believe no one said the word pivot yet, but we had to pivot. And so we did a lot of talking with our teaching artists. We have a roster of almost 100 artists. So we had to speak with the ones that were running programs to figure out if it was possible to continue running their programs, how we would run their programs. One of the things that I did was to speak with Artreach, which is a local arts organization here that does a lot of inclusive programming and accessible programming. And we do partner with them a lot. So a lot of the teaching artists that work with them were also the ones that were working in our programs. And so we spoke with them about what it was that we could do in order to make our programs more accessible online. So one of the things that we did, and we'll show a video in a moment, which shows one of our teaching artists, Alex Mitnick, who has a program called Alex and the Kaleidoscope. And he does a singing program where he has students sing his songs, his original music. He actually used to have a television show on New York public television. And so he did a program where he had all of the students learn the song over the course of the remaining sessions that they had in the program. They learned the song, and then they recorded videos of themselves and had parental support to be able to record themselves in most cases. And then he actually edited a video together of them singing that song together. So if you can show that video, just a minute or so of it.
It's the night time, the stars are bright. The moon is shining and the sun is coming down. The leaves are falling, the wind is blowing so. wanna spend some time dreaming with you.
And sometimes I get afraid on this journey. I don't want to be alone. And sometimes I overcome with worry. Will I make it home? That's when I dream. Life is not what it seems. Yeah, anything is possible. Dream, no matter how hard it can be. All you gotta do is believe.
Someone wrote goosebumps in the chat, and I well up every time I watch it. So in the process of seeing that video, it was a really moving video for us to see. What I learned from that process and from the training that I went through with Outreach, which really was just a webinar. It wasn't a long, process, and I would by no means say that I'm an expert. But what I learned is that going into the fall, we were going to need to create a lot of videos for our programs. We wanted to be able to have videos. We wanted to do prepare our teaching artists to do live teaching, to do hybrid teaching where we were sending videos and doing live sessions. And so we embarked upon a recording project where we brought 6 of our residency programs into a recording studio and filmed them doing their residency programs and had them sort of rethink how they would do their residency programs, obviously making the workshops a lot shorter because people just can't stay online so long, all day long, but giving them sort of activity that they can do offline, providing closed captioning, which I'll be able to show you another video, which is a short example. We actually haven't finished the process yet of making these videos. And so the closed captioning isn't on them yet, but we do plan to upload them to YouTube. And then we've done some of the editing ourselves, captioning them with lyrics so that students can sing along with them. One of the things that we didn't do as well as I wanted to in the recording process, because it was sort of such a big endeavor and took up so much of our time, was to have the teaching artists do more descriptive language as they were creating their videos. So we did miss out on that part, and it is a lesson learned in the process of the first round of videos, but we have 30 ensembles on our roster, so we're hoping that in the next round we can do that a little bit better. But if you would show the next video, this is oh, and I'll set it up. The woman in the video is Alexandra Day. She's a vocal teaching artist as well. It's not the only type of program that we do. It just so happens that I'm showing you 2 videos of vocal teaching artists, but she's wearing a yellow shirt and glasses. She's a white woman with kind of shortish curly hair, and she's performing in front of a brick wall.
Today we're going to learn the second verse of Lean On Me. Now the second verse has exactly the same melody as the first verse, but it has new lyrics. Okay, same melody, new lyrics. And today, instead of using my ukulele for accompaniment, I'm going to use my keyboard. So I'll sing you the second verse first, and then we can break it up into pieces and try it out together. Please swallow your pride. If I have things you need to borrow, for no one can fill those of your needs that you won't let show. Can you hear how that had the exact same melody as the first verse? Sometimes in our lives, except this one we're going to sing, please swallow your pride. Different lyrics, all right? So it starts out, please swallow your pride. If I have things you need to borrow. Want to try that with me? We'll do it twice. So please swallow your pride. Ready, go. Please swallow your pride. If I have things you need to borrow. Good. And by the way, what are we even saying? Swallow your pride if I have things. Basically, this means if you need.
Thank you. So that's kind of a first stab at trying to move towards having our programs be more accessible and more inclusive. And what you don't see in the earlier part of the video is that we do have the vocabulary words showing on the screen as well. So as she's saying melody, and as she's saying verse, and as she's saying chorus, those words are coming up onto the screen so that you can see those cues as well. So like I said, it's a work in progress. We're learning as we go, and hopefully we'll be able to continue investing in this form of education, and open to any questions or discussion.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Leslie. Wonderful videos. I'm going to hand it off to Sina. And Sina, if you have any comments or advice.
I think this is really interesting. Thank you for the presentation and for the all the work you're doing. With respect to the words appearing on the screen, are they also spoken out loud, like while they're being talked about? When she talks about melody, that's when we see melody on the screen. That's my first question before I keep going.
Yes, it is.
Okay, and then is there an interactive element, or is that mainly for reinforcement so that we have a multimodal presentation of information? We've got the visible words and her talking about it. Or is there like a definition or a link or something interactive that's part of that as well?
Well, in this example, we wanted to have the visual words on the screen as well to serve the purpose of the visual learner as well as those that aren't able to actually hear what's being said. And then the lyrics are actually running across the screen at the bottom. And so for that, that's also to help the students actually learn the song, but also for those that aren't actually hearing it to be able to see the words that are happening on the screen. And they are synced with when she is saying the words, so that there's a flow to it, that they're actually, as they're flowing across the screen, they go from white to red as the word is being said. So it's very clear when you're supposed to say each word, for those that are following it that way.
So there's a caption-like setup, but then also even one step further than that, there's a emphasis on whether you want to talk about prosody or affect. There's this emphasis on which word is being said at the moment that she's saying them.
That, yes. And then in some of the other videos, we also included images. So for instance, we have a Bollywood dance program, and throughout her program, she's talking about different festivals. She's talking about different parts of India, different languages, different aspects of the culture. And so we show pictures as well on screen, so that there's sort of a visual reference there as well while she's talking about it. So she's describing it. Like
Goa, there'll be a picture of Goa or the beach or something like that.
Exactly.
To reinforce. Okay. Awesome. I'm wondering about, well, two things come to mind immediately. One is with music, just as from a personal anecdote perspective. I've been recently teaching myself music theory, and, typical stuff, right? Go look at it on YouTube. But what's the major thing that people do on YouTube? It's they will show a camera with their hand positions, and a lot of time that's what you see. So visually you're like, oh, okay, she hit a G sharp, or oh, okay, that's the form of the hand I should take. Now some people naturally just talk while they're teaching, other people don't, and some people have been trained to do it intentionally. I'm wondering here, what's been your process in terms of, you mentioned Outreach and others, like in terms of inclusion and accessibility? A lot of us, we think about that after the fact, but what's been the process in terms of during production, like talking with the artists about a way that it doesn't interfere with their process and their workflow, but are some things they could keep in mind in order to make their content seamlessly more accessible?
Yeah, and that's really something that I'm thinking about now that we actually have the footage back of, unfortunately. We are planning on doing another round, so hopefully that will make its way into the next round of videos. But an interesting thing, an interesting anecdote is that the same program, the Bollywood program, it's a dance program. And so she talks a lot throughout the beginning of the program and talks about different aspects of the culture, and then she dances.
Mm-hmm.
And she didn't use descriptive language in the dance pieces. So she's not really, I mean, to a certain extent she is, but not to the extent that someone could actually participate.
Right.
And so she's actually teaching a program at a school for the blind right now, online. So we're not providing the videos to them. She's actually teaching with them live. And so she did a whole training with the school to learn what it is that she should be doing in order to best communicate with the students. And so she's doing a lot of descriptive language and really thinking about each step of the way of what she's doing. Like what she was saying to me this morning when I was talking with her about it was, well, you put your hand in front of you. Where do you put your hand in front of
that's
you?
right.
And, you know, is it only one hand or is it both hands? And are they touching each other? And those types of things that she's really thinking through right now, which makes me want to then go in and edit her voice throughout the entire video that she did, because it would be so useful to be able to have that. So, so we're really learning through that process. And fortunately, she's come on staff as one of the program members. So I'm really hoping that we can kind of infuse her learning into what the other teaching artists are doing live in their programs and also in the videos that we record.
One thing that might be helpful is that sometimes, think about dance, for example. I mean, you could be talking at 1,000,000 miles a minute. You're still not able to sometimes convey, especially with like modern dance, everything that needs to happen for purposes of reproducing those gestures if you're not able to see them. So it's been helpful in certain other arenas to name particular poses or gestures, and then you have a conversation, a training video, a web page, whatever medium you want to use to convey those named positions, like, okay, now I'm going to slide into position 3, or now I'm going to do the second type of transition we talked about into XYZ, right? Like you can actually have a conversation about it that way. So then you use these shorter identifiers that you can rattle off while you're performing the action or while you're playing or while you're describing a particular move, but then have a longer form description. You know, think of it almost like a glossary that is a separate video, a separate audio file, a separate web page, a separate Zoom call that can define what those things are. And in this way, it also helps build a vocabulary, a design language, if you will, that can then actually be helpful for everybody involved in future projects as well.
Yeah, and that was one of the things that I was in the process of going into filming. I was thinking about the fact that these videos need to be able to serve as many populations as possible. And that also, to a certain extent, the descriptive language might be difficult for certain students to process as they're trying to learn something. And so thinking about showing that video that you showed, where it just sort of naturally becomes part of what they're saying, was really helpful to me, because I think if it just becomes a natural part of what every teaching artist is doing anyway, it doesn't seem strange and out of place, and doesn't seem awkward, and it's just kind of a part of the natural flow. But I also love the idea of having 2 different versions of the same video.
Yeah, and there's one form of audio description. It may be helpful to you in this project where it's extended audio description. So this is a little bit more tricky to, you can't just put it on YouTube unless if you put it on as a separate video. We can get into the details, but the idea is that imagine doing audio description regular, like we've been talking about throughout this session, but then you pause. And the audio description keeps going, and then the video resumes. So if you have a 5-minute video, the extended audio described version of the video, it may be 6 minutes long, it may be 7 minutes long, but it allows for some space to really get some full descriptions in, which is really helpful, exercise routines, yoga, dance, anything like this, where you really need maybe 20 seconds to describe one particular pose. So something else to just put on your radar there.
Yeah, thank you. That's so helpful.
In terms of you mentioned that there's like going to be, I think you said 30 different ensembles. Is that right? Can you talk a little bit more about like some of the future plans? Because it sounds like this is really a continuous process for you. You started from one place, started making things more inclusive in a variety of different ways, have plans in the future. What's that progression look like if you're comfortable sharing that? I just think that it's really helpful for other people that might be on a similar journey, that we don't get everything right the first time. We need to just kind of iterate forward. So what does that look like for you?
Yeah, we have about 30 different ensembles on our roster, and they are, not all of them work in special needs communities. Not every teaching artist is cut out for necessarily working in special needs communities. And we have a variety of different types of special needs. Some of the sort of intellectual disabilities or physical disabilities. We've actually just started, our partner organization is Dancing Classrooms Philly. And they've created a ballroom dance program for physically disabled students. And they're actually going to be doing that at the same Royer Graves, which is the School for the Blind. So they're trying to figure out how to kind of make that work in as a video program and also as a live Zoom program. So, but so the teaching artists that we know are comfortable working in a special needs environment. Those are the ones that we're working with specifically to make sure that we can make those video programs and those Zoom programs still accessible. But there's also teaching artists that we're sort of bringing up into those programs because we want to be able to offer all of our programs to anyone that wants to participate in them. And so that's, it's been a process. Our teaching artists are actually they have their own programs. They're contractors. They own the rights to their programs. They develop the programs themselves. So we don't have too much control over what they want to do with their programs. And so it's really up to them where they feel comfortable. But we do try and encourage teaching artists, especially because so much of our programming actually serves special needs communities, that we want them to be able to participate in that as well.
Awesome. Oh,
right.
Go ahead.
Oh, go ahead, Sina. We're just
no. I was literally about to turn it over to you. So great minds.
Thank you so much. So we're running short on time, Leslie, but I wanted to thank you and also to elevate some of the wonderful feedback and commentary in the chat about these great ideas, dance vocabulary, building that for movement, incorporating math into dance. So I want to thank you again for sharing your project with us. And Sina, thank you for all of that feedback too. In the last time that we have together, I did want to open it up to Sina to give us any more. We've touched a lot on audio description and captioning tips and tricks. Would love to know if you have any other tips you can share with us about building inclusive design from the ground up, or maybe key points you really need to do with inclusive lesson planning.
Well, a few things. I'll comment on platform and media first, maybe. So we've talked about audio description and captions and subtitles and things of this nature, all really around video. But videos have to live somewhere. They live on a website, they live on YouTube, they live in Netflix, they live somewhere. And how we surface, how we present this information is sometimes just as important, if not more so, than the accessibility of the content itself. So imagine being on a website for a class and the video might be perfectly accessible. The professor or teacher is talking about things in a descriptive manner and there is captions and everything's great. There's a transcript available. But what if the website is not digitally accessible? Right? Then you're not able to access that information. So just a shout out to making sure that we keep in mind not only these affordances we're talking about in terms of media and multimedia accessibility and multisensory and multimodal design, but also just the basics in terms of making sure that the website itself is accessible, is able to be accessed with assistive technologies like a screen reader, the program I use to interact with the web, or can look that is operational when you zoom in on it over 200%. right? It's able to be used when you have your phone or your laptop in high contrast mode or invert colors mode, right? So there's all of these different built-in affordances that are in our operating systems, whether it's on iPhone or Android or Mac or Windows or Linux. But you need to also make sure that your offerings, whether it's a website, a learning management system, a PDF that you're sending out, anything along those lines, an app that you might be working on, that those are accessible to as many people as possible with these assistive technologies. And a lot of that has to do with following standards, working with developers and designers on making sure you center certain concepts up front. I'm happy to talk about that. But I just wanted to make sure we didn't leave without making sure to give this really critical call out to digital accessibility. You also mentioned inclusive design in the context of lesson planning. So we touched on this a little bit earlier. There's using descriptive language. For example, I would always have the conversation with my professors at university. When you're writing on something on the board, don't just say, we'll move this over here, right? Say what the this is, say what the that is, right? And that not only helps me, it helps somebody who's looking down taking notes. It helps somebody who's looking at their laptop screen typing it up, right? It helps somebody who might prefer information through audio instead of visual. So always having these strategic or tactical redundancies when we present information, whether it's through audio and video, whether it's through text, whether it's all of the above, it's really, really helpful. And it also allows us to think about our own content in different ways. We've worked with tons of curators and folks in the museum space on visual descriptions of art, for example. And so many curators, were like, I was first skeptical about this. This is what we're trained not to do, in terms of just simply describing what is there, all of those sorts of reactions at the beginning. And then after the process, they go, wow, this was so freeing. I was able to just concentrate on what I'm able to see and to translate that into words. And it really brings consideration, and it brings really thoughtfulness to just the content itself. And I fundamentally believe that can help absolutely everybody. Lastly, I'll say that it can really be moving in terms of one's own practice. Anna Cairata Lavatelli, when she was working at the Museum of Contemporary Art in Chicago, she did artist-led touch tours. And so the artists would actually lead a touch tour of their work. And she did this once with, for example, somebody who was a painter. And he was like, well, people aren't going to get anything from my work. I'm totally fine if they touch it. It can withstand that. That's not a problem. And so then a School for the Blind group, went through this experience with him. And he breaks down into tears. He is like, this has totally changed his entire practice. He's like, I can't believe how much detail they were able to pick up from this work. This is incredibly meaningful. And it really not only was a personal benefit and moving and poignant moment, but also one that influenced his practice moving forward, and not to mention was inclusive and full of audio description and other aspects for the kids that were visiting that day. So just to say that this work that we talk about and considering the actions that we're taking through a lens of inclusion, it's not only accessibility that's the byproduct of that. It's not only accessibility and access that's the side effect of that. There's a lot of other benefits that are just multivariate and really ever present when we do this work.
Thank you, Sina. And building off that point, I wanted to highlight the Inclusive Arts Vermont project of the Mail-In project. So thinking about in this world, especially the museum tours that rely on touch a lot. So like these touchable things that we can't obviously meet in person, we can't share as a group, we can't touch things as a group. But the idea that we can still use good old fashioned mail to send materials to people, and even thinking about Leslie's project of how do you describe a movement or body shape,
Yeah.
or any of the gestures that we worked on with Inclusive Arts Vermont, is like maybe even creating a touchable material or an outline of a
Yes.
figure that's touchable that you
Yes.
could send to people through the mail.
And it doesn't have to be expensive, right? Like, for example, there's all sorts of different levels of that. You can do professional tactile diagram print shops that specialize in producing braille and tactile resources. But if you have a 3D printer, there's open source scripts out there that would let you draw with a 3D printer. So if, for those who are familiar, a 3D printer layers plastic one layer at a time. So even something as simple as a cube, it might be 1,000 layers tall. Well, you don't have to do all the 1,000 layers. You can just take a sheet of paper, put it on the print bed, and then you can use a 3D printer to print the outline of it. It's sort of a cheap, inexpensive way of generating a throwaway object, if you will, something that's ephemeral. It's okay if it gets tossed in the trash. It's okay if it doesn't get kept. It's just a quick way of doing rapid prototyping. There's all sorts of things. There's these things called Wiki Sticks, which are basically like wax-like substance that you can just stick on a piece of paper. They're very sticky, but you can bend them and turn them into different shapes. You can use a pegboard with rubber bands. I mean, seriously, like, we don't have to spend hundreds of dollars or thousands of dollars on things. But if you do have some budget for material design, or a local university that has a group of undergraduate students that need a design project, let me tell you, they are constantly looking for design projects, then talk to them about these things and see if there's a partnership opportunity there where you can get professionally done, 3D prints of objects and different materials like textiles. When we were working with museums, sometimes we can't touch the original artifact, but we can work with museums on coming up with touch objects or learning objects that have been deaccessioned, for example, and then are able to be circulated around. So there's lots of opportunities. It doesn't have to be expensive or intricate in order to be inclusive and accessible. And then lastly, I would say just documentation, right? So think about holding something that maybe someone else can't hold for whatever reason, COVID, they're far away, whatever the reason may be. Describe that. Right? Don't just do a visual description, but what does it feel in the hand? What does it feel like in the hand? What's the balance? What's the temperature? What's the rigidity of it? Is it soft? Is it hard? What's the texture of it? And these can inform to make richer descriptions that can then be shared through audio, through audio recordings or text or things of this nature.
That's wonderful. And I want to highlight that about partnerships being something that could be free or low cost. And it's wonderful. I'll give a shout out to New York Public Library, the Andrew High School.
Yes.
Yeah, Andrew High School Library has, you can work with them to use their Braille printer and their 3D printers. Yeah, I think it's a 3D printer. Mm-hmm. So again, if you're in the New York area, it's free to low cost. Actually, moving back to the technology for your low-cost technology conversation, do you have any favorite apps, programs, platforms that you want to highlight? I know this is not a paid sponsorship, but just if you have any favorites.
I would say that there's a couple of things. For anyone who uses an Apple device, there are quite literally tens of thousands of dollars of assistive technologies built into your devices. So I have an iPhone sitting on my desk to my left right here, and it has a screen reader built in. It has a magnifier built in, both for the camera to magnify external things and to magnify the screen. It has affordances for those who might have trouble touching the screen and keeping their finger rigid. It has affordances for switch users, folks who perform head motions. I'm moving my head left or right, or nodding up and down. And this can then translate to touch gestures. So someone who doesn't have the use of their body from their neck down can still drive an iPad. This is built into your devices. So it's important to realize that those considerations we take on accessibility, on making our apps accessible, on making our websites more usable, that's almost the easy step from my opinion, because back in the day, 20 years ago, people had to also have all of these assistive technologies just to access these things. So if you, are involved in creating content, I would say try using that content without a mouse. Just see how it works out for you. Try going through your day and avoiding stairs and see, just be mindful of that, right? Put your devices in high contrast mode and use that for a week and just see how that experience is. I think it raises awareness. And then I can share, if it's okay with Lincoln Center, I can send you guys some links if there's a share out after this event. I'm happy to share a glossary and some reading list stuff. I'll paste some links in the chat that has links to other forms of, browser extensions and things you can use to check the accessibility of your stuff.
Wonderful. Thank you. Yes. If you share those, all of those resources, we can share them out on the Facebook. And with that, I want to thank all of our presenters, and a huge thank you, Sina, for all of your wonderful support and advice. And I will hand it off to Laurel for our goodbye.
Thanks for having me. Thanks for everything you guys do.
Great. Thank you so much, Laura. Thank you again, Sina, and thank you to all of our guests for being with us. A friendly reminder to join us again on Tuesday, November 17th at 6 p.m. for a panel exploring learner engagement through online platforms. We have some great panelists lined up for you then. We'll drop the link to register in the chat. Also in the chat are links to learn more about Lincoln Center's accessibility programs, Passport to the Arts, and Lincoln Center Moments. And finally, please enjoy Sina's Lincoln Center Activate session from this past July. Link is also in the chat. Thanks again for joining us, and we'll see you soon.